The 21st century undoubtedly will be the Asian century. And you know, in the 19th century was the European century, the natural capital was London, the 20th century was the American century, and the natural capital was New York. The 21st century will be the Asian century. And if you're looking for a city where all major civilizational strains of Asia come together, it is Singapore, because you have the Chinese civilizational strain in 75% of the population. You have the Islamic civilizational strain in 15% of the population. You have the Indic civilizational strain in 8% of the population, that is Indian. And equally importantly, you have the Western civilizational strain in the fact that Singapore essentially functions as an English language speaking society with an Anglo-Saxon cultural universe plugged into Singapore too.
I'm James Chau. I'm in Singapore to speak with Kishore Mahbubani, author of Has China Won? Tell me about Southeast Asia, a region that's being courted by leaders in the US and also by China, as shown by Bongbong Marcos and his recent visit to Beijing. What's the risk of picking a side now and getting too involved in a geopolitical contest that these two are raging at?
The biggest damage you could do to Southeast Asia is to divide Southeast Asia, with countries being forced to take sides, some being pro-American, other being pro-China. That would be a disaster for Southeast Asia. And frankly, I think also a disaster for both the United States and for China. So actually, if there's one common interest that United States and China have, it is to keep Southeast Asia stable and predictable. And the best way to do it is for both the United States and China to continue supporting ASEAN as the regional organization that holds Southeast Asia together. And the good news is that all the 10 Southeast Asian countries, despite the fact that some ASEAN countries are closer to the United States, like Vietnam, some ASEAN countries are closer to China, like Cambodia and Laos, but despite that, they all believe that Southeast Asia will be best served by keeping ASEAN strong and resilient.
You're a diplomat, an author, a thought leader, but you're also a strong champion for your region, arguing in favor of Asia's 21st century, the title, of course, of your newest book. But given the unique local risks, including a volatile Taiwan Strait and South China Sea dispute, do you still bet on Asia if you're the betting man?
What's interesting is that it is not just me who's betting on Asia. You're right. There may be problems like Taiwan Straits, there may be problems like South China Sea, but it's important to also remember that there is clearly a pragmatic streak that we have seen in East Asia and Southeast Asia that has prevented many conflicts from getting out of hand. So I believe that as long as you have this culture of pragmatism in East Asia and Southeast Asia, then I'm confident that the Asian century will happen. And as I said earlier, people around the world also are preparing for this Asian 21st century.
Finally, what are you working on now? And thus, what should we anticipate in the world next?
Well, I've taken on the most difficult assignment ever in my life, which is to write my memoirs. And I hope to have a manuscript submitted to my publisher in New York by June 2023. But I must confess here that I must find it much easier to write about the state of the world than to write about myself.
Kishore Mahbubani, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you for coming to Singapore.
You can watch all my interviews with Kishore Mahbubani here in Singapore for China-US Focus. I'm James Chau. Take care. Goodbye.